Lisa Reynolds thought she had left her past behind, and Daniel believed their marriage was safe. But Mark Latham never let go. Posing as someone from her past, he watched, waited, and planned a nightmare that would shatter everything Lisa held dear. This is the chilling story of obsession, deception, and a deadly secret hiding in plain sight. Lisa Reynolds had always been someone who seemed to have life perfectly in order. She was smart, independent, and driven, with a career she loved and a circle of friends who admired her. Her marriage to Daniel, a kind and attentive man, was supposed to mark the start of a new, joyful chapter in her life. To the outside world, everything about her existence looked ideal, almost enviable. But behind the walls of her home, a tension was quietly creeping in, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore as days turned into weeks. It began with small, easily dismissible incidents. The first time she noticed it, a shadowy figure had been standing across the street from her house late at night. She had brushed it off, thinking it was just a neighbor or a passerby. Then came the phone calls where no one spoke, just silence on the other end. A chill ran down her spine each time the phone rang, but she tried to convince herself it was nothing more than a prank. Her friends laughed off her fears, attributing them to stress or fatigue, but deep down, Lisa felt uneasy, an instinctive sense that someone was watching her, studying her movements, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The feeling of being followed soon became undeniable. At the grocery store, she caught glimpses of unfamiliar faces lingering nearby, eyes seemingly focused on her, then disappearing as soon as she tried to get a closer look. Cars appeared outside her home at odd hours, remaining parked for minutes before driving away, leaving no trace of license plates or identities. Even in her own home, she felt the intrusion. Small things out of place, doors slightly ajar, objects moved just enough to make her question if she had misplaced them herself. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong, yet she couldn't pinpoint who or why. Lisa had a past she had tried to leave behind, memories of a relationship that had ended painfully years before. She had believed the chapter closed, yet an unseen force seemed determined to bring it back into her life. Someone from that past had not only remembered her, but had meticulously planned a way to insert themselves back into her world, unnoticed and undetected. Every day became a game of observation, a tense effort to spot signs of intrusion while maintaining the normalcy of her routine. The most frightening part was the calculated precision. Whoever was watching knew her schedule, her habits, her friends, even the places she liked to go alone. It was as if someone had mapped out every detail of her life, studying her movements for weeks, months, perhaps even years. Each subtle intrusion, each silent call, each shadow across the street was part of a larger plan, one that Lisa couldn't yet see. Fear had begun to creep into her daily existence. A slow, insidious presence that followed her from the moment she woke to the moment she closed her eyes at night. Even as she tried to ignore the signs, the evidence of being watched grew stronger. Lisa was trapped in a world where familiarity felt dangerous and safety was an illusion. Unknown to her, the person behind it all was closer than she imagined. Someone who had once loved her and now sought to control, manipulate, and ultimately destroy the life she had built. The danger was real, and it was only beginning. Mark Latham had always been the kind of person who knew how to disappear when he wanted to, leaving no trace behind. Years ago, he had been Lisa's boyfriend during her college days, someone she had once trusted completely. Their relationship had ended bitterly, with anger, heartbreak, and resentment lingering in its wake. After the breakup, Mark vanished from Lisa's life, or so she thought. What she didn't know was that he had been silently following her from a distance, never fully letting go of the obsession that had taken root in his mind. He watched as her life unfolded, monitoring social media, tracking milestones, and noting every significant detail. Mark's obsession was quiet at first, hidden behind the mask of anonymity. He created fake accounts online, sending messages that seemed coincidental or accidental, carefully crafting his interactions to avoid suspicion. He studied every photograph, every social post, every comment, and pieced together the story of her adult life. Lisa had moved on, married Daniel, and built a life that Mark had no part in. For him, this was intolerable. Jealousy and fixation combined to create a dangerous, unrelenting force that pushed him to plan a return to her life, not as the man she had once known, but as someone she could not immediately identify. The stalking was methodical. He learned her routines down to the smallest details, the grocery stores she preferred, the jogging paths she frequented, the times she left for work and returned home. He even discovered the people she interacted with regularly, noting who she trusted and who she considered close. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle that he intended to complete. He observed from afar, leaving subtle signs meant to unsettle, but not alarm her too early. Unfamiliar cars parked nearby, strange phone calls, a fleeting glimpse of someone standing in the shadows, all carefully calculated to introduce doubt and fear without exposing himself fully. Mark's obsession grew darker when he realized that mere observation was not enough. He wanted to reassert a form of control, to rewrite the narrative that life had taken away from him. The idea of Lisa married to someone else became unbearable, fueling a desire that crossed the boundary between infatuation and malice. He began to manipulate elements of her daily life more actively, leaving small, puzzling tokens, sending messages that hinted at knowledge of her past, and creating incidents that made her question her own memory or judgment. The level of his planning revealed the depth of his fixation. Mark was patient and relentless, knowing that a single misstep could ruin everything he had constructed over months of surveillance and deception. He studied Daniel from a distance as well, learning the dynamics of their relationship, understanding how he could exploit weaknesses and vulnerabilities to get closer to Lisa. Every step he took was calculated, every interaction measured. Lisa had no way of knowing that the person encroaching on her life was someone who had once held her heart. To her, the signs were confusing, terrifying, and untraceable. She sensed danger, but the true source remained invisible. Mark had transformed himself into a phantom, a presence lurking behind every corner of her life, waiting for the precise moment when fear would turn into something far worse. His obsession was no longer passive. It was on the verge of becoming deadly, and nothing would stand in its way. The tension in Lisa's life escalated slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but with a force that made her world feel increasingly unsafe. The small signs of intrusion she had noticed before now became more pointed, more personal. Letters began arriving at her home, carefully folded and unsigned, each one referencing private memories from her past. At first, she tried to dismiss them as coincidences or mistakes, but the content of the letters suggested otherwise. Whoever was sending them knew things only someone close to her, someone from her past, could possibly know. These letters were unsettling in their precision. They referenced moments she had long forgotten, conversations she had thought were private, and details about her life that she assumed were buried in the past. Each one seemed to echo the same unnerving message. Someone was watching, someone was present, even when she was alone. Lisa tried to maintain her composure, showing these letters to Daniel, who shrugged them off, attributing her fears to anxiety. But the unease in her gut told her otherwise. She could no longer ignore that her life was being invaded by someone with a clear and disturbing intent. Mark's obsession had now become invasive and deliberate. He followed her during her daily routines, tracking the times she left for work, the routes she took, and even the errands she ran. He made subtle manipulations in her environment, doors left slightly open, objects moved just enough to unsettle her, signs that someone had been inside her home without her knowledge. Lisa began to notice inconsistencies she could not explain, and her anxiety grew to a point where she felt constantly on edge. Her safe spaces, her home, her office, even her favorite cafe, felt compromised. The letters escalated both in frequency and in the implicit threat they carried. What had started as vague references to past memories now included warnings, hints that someone was always near, and cryptic messages that left her with a chilling sense of dread. Mark was testing her, pushing her to acknowledge his presence without revealing himself directly. He had transformed stalking into an art of psychological manipulation, keeping Lisa in a state of constant vigilance and fear. Despite the terror, Lisa tried to take action. She began documenting every incident, noting the times of the strange calls, photographing cars that lingered too long, and storing the letters safely. She even considered security cameras and alarm systems, though she knew the stalker had likely anticipated these measures. Every attempt at protecting herself seemed inadequate against the precision of his knowledge and the depth of his obsession. As the days passed, the danger became undeniable. Mark E.'s presence was no longer just a shadow in her peripheral vision. It had become an active force, one that could influence her life, her choices, and eventually her survival. He had meticulously studied her existence, learned her patterns, and found ways to infiltrate her life without detection. Lisa's fear was no longer just about being watched. It was about what might happen when the stalker decided that observation was no longer enough. By the end of these weeks, the invisible boundary between Lisa's world and Mark's obsession had dissolved entirely. The person she had once loved and thought gone forever had become an omnipresent threat, a force that could strike without warning. The sense of safety she once took for granted had vanished, replaced by an anxious awareness that her life was now under the control of someone who would not stop until his obsession was satisfied, whatever the cost. The tension in Lisa's life reached a breaking point one stormy evening. Rain pounded against the windows of her home, a relentless rhythm that seemed to echo the anxiety she carried with her. She had grown hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, and every creak of the floorboards, convinced that someone was moving silently just beyond her vision. The months of psychological torment had primed her for fear, but nothing could have fully prepared her for what was about to happen. Mark Latham had been patient, careful, and meticulous. He had studied every detail of Lisa's life, every pattern, every routine, and every moment she considered private. He knew exactly when she would be alone, and he knew how to enter her world without raising suspicion. Posing as someone familiar from her past, he carefully orchestrated the circumstances to make his approach seem coincidental. The plan was flawless on paper, but real-world variables demanded perfect timing, which he had calculated down to the hour. That night, Mark slipped into Lisa's life under the guise of harmless familiarity. He had ensured that Daniel would be absent, creating a window of opportunity where Lisa was completely isolated. As he approached her home, the shadows of the storm cloaked his movements. He entered without confrontation, leaving no signs of forced entry, relying instead on prior knowledge of the house's layout and security blind spots. Inside, he moved with the quiet precision of someone who had done this countless times in his imagination, each step bringing him closer to the terrifying goal he had been preparing for. Lisa, unaware of the intruder's presence, carried on with small tasks in her living room, the sound of rain masking the subtle shifts in her environment. The letters, the calls, the eerie signs of surveillance. They had all been building toward this moment. Every subtle message and calculated threat had led to this singular point, where Mark's obsession transformed from psychological terror into imminent physical danger. The attack was swift and brutal, designed to leave minimal trace of struggle. Mark struck decisively, leaving Lisa with no time to react. The meticulous planning extended to the aftermath as well. Objects were arranged to suggest an accident, a fall, or an unforeseen misfortune. He had envisioned every potential obstacle, every investigative avenue, and had crafted a scenario that he believed would deflect suspicion. In his mind, the perfect crime was not only possible, it was inevitable. Yet, the plan began to unravel almost immediately. Small details, overlooked in the calculated precision, started to emerge. A time-stamped photo, a delivery receipt, a neighbor who had glimpsed a figure entering the house, all fragments that threatened to expose the truth. Mark's belief in his control over the situation collided with the reality of the outside world, where even the most careful plans could be challenged by random chance. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside Lisa's world. What had started as a carefully controlled scenario devolved into a battle of timing, observation, and subtle exposure. The layers of deception that Mark had built over months of stalking now faced the scrutiny of unexpected witnesses and tangible evidence, cracks forming in his carefully constructed illusion. By the end of the night, Lisa's life hung in a precarious balance, her fate determined by a combination of Mark's obsession and the fragile chain of events that might expose him. The presence of someone from her past, someone she had once trusted, had turned deadly, revealing the terrifying extent of calculated human obsession. The nightmare had moved from shadow to reality, leaving behind a chilling reminder of how quickly safety could dissolve into horror. The aftermath of that stormy night left Lisa's world shattered. What had begun as subtle signs of fear and unease had escalated into a nightmare that she could no longer ignore. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, and while Lisa survived the attack, the realization of what had nearly happened weighed heavily on her. The authorities began a meticulous investigation, piecing together the fragments of evidence left behind by someone who had been careful, calculating, and disturbingly familiar with her life. The initial confusion of the crime scene slowly gave way to clarity as investigators noticed inconsistencies that didn't align with an accident. The positioning of objects, subtle disturbances in the home, and the pattern of entries pointed to deliberate intrusion. Digital forensics revealed a complex network of online accounts, phone numbers, and communications that had been used to track Lisa over months. Each message, each letter, each shadow that had followed her life now painted a chilling portrait of premeditation and obsession. Through a combination of surveillance footage, witness accounts, and digital footprints, the investigators began to uncover the identity of the person responsible. Shockingly, it was someone from Lisa's past, Mark Latham, her former boyfriend. The revelation stunned everyone who knew him, as Mark had maintained the facade of a normal life, blending into society with ease while secretly orchestrating a campaign of fear and control. The meticulous planning that had enabled him to stalk and manipulate Lisa for months highlighted the depths of his obsession and the danger he posed. Further investigation revealed the extent of Mark's fixation. He had studied Lisa's habits, social circle, and home environment with obsessive precision. He had planned every detail of the attack, from the timing to the manipulation of her surroundings, all while creating a web of deception that he believed would shield him from suspicion. But despite his careful orchestration, the smallest overlooked elements, an eyewitness, a timestamp, a misplaced item, began to unravel his plan. The combination of modern technology and human observation proved stronger than his calculated control. The trial that followed exposed the terrifying reality of human obsession. Evidence of stalking, harassment, and premeditation was presented in painstaking detail, revealing the full scope of Mark's calculated intrusion into Lisa's life. Friends and family of Lisa recounted the anxiety and fear that had been present for months, emphasizing the psychological toll of living under the shadow of someone's obsession. Mark's attempts to manipulate perceptions and cover his tracks were laid bare, leaving no room for doubt about his intentions. Ultimately, Mark Latham was convicted for stalking, attempted murder, and other related crimes. The sentence reflected the severity of his actions and the potential for even greater tragedy. Lisa's courage and determination to seek help, document incidents, and cooperate with law enforcement were instrumental in ensuring justice was served. While her life would never return to the innocence it once had, her experience became a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and the importance of vigilance. The community learned that danger can lurk in the most familiar faces, and that even the most careful and calculated predators can be exposed. Lisa's resilience, courage, and survival became a lasting testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of darkness.